I grew up in Escatawpa, Mississippi, so just outside of Moss Point, Pascagoula area. I grew up on Brickyard Bayou, but spent a lot of my childhood there, swimming and playing around. The current show we're sitting in is a retelling of Homer's Iliad, so all of these scenes are taken from moments from the Iliad. The whole thing takes place in Mississippi. The whole narrative is picked because of my childhood in Mississippi. The whole show's about Mississippi. In general, moments where men are doing misplaced heroism, I found a real affinity for. I think it relates so heavily to like my upbringing in the South and what it means to be a man. And so the Iliad is rife with those, and that's kind of what I tried to like set as the examples in the show. It's autobiographical. A lot of the accusations I'm putting on the men I grew up with, I can put on myself equally footed. That you choose what's hard instead of what's clever. That there's some heroism in withstanding pain as opposed to avoiding it altogether. I think it's complicated. I think it's obviously dumb on its face, but it's also the way I was raised. There's something more heroic about a construction worker than a lawyer. There's something more heroic about pulling your own tooth out than going to a dentist or staying at a hurricane party than driving north. And it's deeply embedded in me. It's something that I have to unpack like throughout my life. I know it's hard for me to get work in Mississippi. I can count on one hand the number of walls I have in Mississippi. And I don't know, I guess I've always thought creatives are Mississippi's greatest export because we can make them, but we can't sustain them. Even living in Memphis, 90% of my work comes from out of town. In general, in the South, it's hard to make a full-time living. So we become ramblers, like unhoused workers. In the next 4 months, I'll be in 5 cities working. And a lot of that is like, it's the only way to be sustainable in this line of work if you live in the South. It's embryonic. I think it's good when you're starting out because people accept you at face value of what you say you want to be. So if you say you're an artist, no one questions that. Where you might get pushback, I think, in a larger city. You don't have to prove yourself to be what you want to be in Memphis. People are ready to support you. But it has low ceilings and problems with growing your career, for sure. And that's just one of the negatives you take with a lot of positives here. We lost our house during Hurricane Katrina, and part of that stuck with me where I felt, I don't know if against is the right word, but I had no interest in trying to make permanent homes for a long part of my life. And I graduated during a pretty heavy recession with a degree in art, so there wasn't a lot of prospects for me. And you could teach overseas for like the bare minimum, so I don't know, Korea seemed interesting. I already had one friend there. I just went there on pure whim. I was just overwhelmed in a good way. I remember being amazed at how small the Coca-Cola cans were, and just being, even in a moderate-sized city, I felt like there were endless possibilities. There's a new place I could explore, a new street I could explore every day for the rest of my life. It made me want to be outside. It made me want to socialize. The weather was beautiful. The country's beautiful. I was in love with like an environment and a place in a way that I had never felt before. I was working as a spot illustrator for a couple magazines, and the newspaper, and we had really tight deadlines, and so I was just starting to use like shortened visual language, whimsical cartoonish illustrations, usually dealing with like heavier subject matter than the aesthetics describe. I'm pretty like indebted to Saturday morning cartoons growing up, and indebted to the street art style of South Korea at the time I was there. So yeah, I don't know, kind of like an adult version of a Nicktoon. And when I became conscious of that, I was like, if I really lay into this, it could be something that's my own. And so I started consciously pushing that. And that was around the same time I got into graffiti, and I met the graffiti artist there in Seoul, and that sort of became like the Birdcap aesthetic. And I was walking through these abandoned areas, like near Oksu Station, and there were all this great street art on the wall, and I was like, oh, it'd be so crazy to ever know these people. And I looked up their names just by chance, and they had totally had social media accounts, and it was like, I didn't understand that they could have careers. So I sent them a message in like my best Korean, and a woman named Junkhouse responded immediately in like perfect English and was like, you want to get soup? And I was like, yeah. And she showed me the ropes, took me out painting that night, got me my first few murals with her, collabed on all of them. Changed my life. They were extremely warm and gracious, and I owe that whole scene a whole lot. Junkhouse does like biomorphic abstractions where she takes silhouettes of like city structures and makes them like living beings, or implies that they're living beings. Her work is all over Korea. But she's extremely talented, very stern, hard worker, kind of walks around like an old man. She's like 5 foot flat, and would just yell at, like immediately took on the role of older sister, and just like would yell at me until I got it right. But I stay in touch with her to this day. Anytime I go to visit Korea, I see her and get food with her. She's great people. The illustrations were starting to become like more consistent, and then when I went out, there's a way of responding to the material where you're like, if I want this done in a night, I'm going to paint this with spray paint. There's certain layers, and there's a certain like path you take to make it executed before you leave a spot that you're never going to go back to. And I think by painting out in the streets, it really like heat pressed my style into something that was workable and like would take me where I wanted to go. But there were just nights where we would stay up late, maybe get some barbecue, and then go. We'd ride bikes out on the river and paint. But they were just learning experiences. It was fun to go out, fun to paint with Junkhouse, who I really looked up to. But they were just training grounds. We had a police boat come up to us at once, and I wanted to run away, and Junkhouse yelled at me, and it's like, it takes them forever to tie the boat up. But yeah, they were really magical times. Looking back, that's some of the best times of my life. I felt like, for various reasons, being in Korea was never going to be the full test on if I could make it as an artist. I wanted to know if I could make it in the States. I felt like the biggest economy and biggest scene for street art at that time was the US, and I needed to know if I could survive in it. And so I lived in a van for a couple years. There were some rough little moments and hiccups, but I don't know, I was young, I had a fire to do it. I felt immortal. Didn't feel like I was going to have any big issues coming up, so I got lucky to be able to chase it until I figured it out. It went okay because I'm still around. I started in Mississippi, went up to Memphis, and then just started applying to jobs all over the nation, and whatever I got, I would drive to and do. And it's sort of been the model ever since. The van's long dead, and I have a house now, but that's really like been the game for the last 10 years. It's just trying to plant seeds in enough cities to where some fruit is growing somewhere perennially. I had a friend living in Starkville who I went to high school with named Lauren Webb, and she brought me in. She got me a job painting at Stromboli's, and I painted a mural there. And Dan Camp, he liked it, but he also liked that a lot of old people didn't like it. And he was a bit of a like, he enjoyed upsetting folks in like this lovable way. But so he hired me to paint his office, and then I became friends with that family. And for the first couple of years of my career, it was really rocky, and I'd have these huge gaps in income. And the camps would essentially make up work for me just to get me paid. And it led to me painting Commodore Bob's and these other properties he owns. And they've been supporting me as long as I've had an art career. But Dan definitely, he likes to invest in creatives, he's invested in poets and writers and unicyclists and hippie apparel shops, and he was very generous with his energy and his money to things he thought would better Starkville. He saw Starkville as something he could help create. And that certainly looks true when you go through the Cotton District. He's like, his fingerprints all over it. And that's been carried downward through his sons, Bon and Robert. And very lucky to know them. They make me proud of Mississippi and people who stay there and put strides in making it a more inhabitable place for creatives. That was the start of me starting to do a lot of Greek mythology motifs in murals. And that one was going to be on a pork restaurant, like a barbecue shop. So I wanted this hunting scene, and I wanted to do this like powerful female figure. And I wanted to do this like her striking down of this like pig prince, pig king. It was just a way of making sort of like a political piece without it being over the head. And there was a lot of stuff going on in the States at the time, so that was part of my motivation. But also, like, it was motivated by the Cotton District. Like, Dan's really into Greek architecture, and they have the fake Parthenon over there, and so part of it was trying to make something that I thought Dan would be into. And it was my first time coming back in a while, so I felt like I had gotten a lot better. When I was first starting murals with him, I had to hand brush them all because I was so out of control with spray paint. And so that was the first piece I think I did spray paint in the Cotton District. And I just wanted to show out for Dan and like try to do something that he'd enjoy because he'd been supporting me so long. I think wherever you are, you have to like try to figure out how to like take advantage of the strengths and hide the weaknesses. So if you're not in New York, if you're not in LA, what can you do here that's hard to do in New York? What's hard to do in LA? Like, you can have big sculptures, you can have big spaces, you can paint huge walls, you can do things that are nearly impossible if you live in Brooklyn. Brooklyn has a lot of advantages, but which ones do we have? And then try to maximize those potentials. I think regionalism is really dangerous. I think it makes you look inward too much, sometimes at the cost of realizing you're so close to everything else. Like, be a Mississippian and be one that travels and make sure your work is seen elsewhere. Because honestly, the quickest way to legitimize you to your neighbors is to get respect from strangers first. It was hard to make any moves in Memphis, and then I do a couple of jobs in Chicago or LA, and it's easier to move in Memphis now. So just know there's an airport, and it goes both ways. You can be a Mississippian and still be worldwide.